I'm Jim Collison and live from Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Theme Thursday, Season 2, recorded on April 7th, 2016. Theme Thursday is a Gallup web series that dives deep into the Clifton Strengths Finder themes, one theme at a time, and today's theme is context. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video window, right down there if you're at coaching.gallup.com/live. We'd also love to have you join us in chat, if you would. There's a chat room there. Just click on log in at the bottom left-hand corner, put your name in the guest account, and sign in. Super easy to do, and you don't need to create a new account to get it done. That way we know who you are in the chat room. And there's 30 or so out there in the chat right now. If you'd like to join us live, a reminder, we do this out on our live page at the coach's blog, coaching.gallup.com//live. If you're listening to the recorded version, you need custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, send us an email. Questions work too. coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your coaching resources and StrengthsFinder training needs. And you can also catch all these videos. You have well over 150 of them for you now available for you out on the coach's blog. Lots of resources. coaching.gallup.com. Micah Librant is our host today. She's one of my favorite learning and development consultants here at Gallup. And Micah, it's always great to see you. Welcome to another Theme Thursday.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
Let's today is context, which is interesting. Again, we had consistency last week and didn't land very high for me. Context in the same boat, although I like to think I conjure up context because I love a lot of the things that context stands for. So as we talk about that today, it's not in my top 5, not even in my top 10, but it's one of those I have a little bit of theme envy around. Let's talk a little bit about it.
Excellent. Well, I'll be excited to think about that phrase, conjuring up context, and ask you how you do it.
That's right.
I honestly don't know where it is for me, so I'm going to say it's probably somewhere in the middle. In our entire database, context is not super high either. In fact, it falls at number 30 out of 34 in terms of how often people have it in their top 5. So a great opportunity today to help us all fall in love with context, even though we may not have met all that many people who are really rock stars around context. I think that context is probably, other than communication, it is the most appropriately named theme of all 34, because it is all about how do I frame, how do I provide reference, how do I understand where we are and where we're going by giving it context, by contextualizing. People with high context are all about the background, and background can be about the history, about geography, about culture, about place, about credentials, about data. It's about understanding ideas by being able to look to the past and think about where did those ideas come from. It is an executing theme, so this is something that happens inside your head, and it's a really great theme, I think, to just bring considerable depth to the conversation.
One of the things I love to do when I think I'm conjuring up this context is Gallup tours. So when folks come, in fact, if you come to the summit here July 18th, 19th, and 20th, chances are you'll meet me, and then I'll give you some kind of fun fact about the history of Gallup or some of the things we do. Is that what we talk about when we think about this theme? Is it that kind of thing where we try to tie the past to the future?
It could be. It's about tying all your thoughts to the past, for sure. JB, thanks for correcting me. I'm not quite sure I said that correctly. It is a strategic thinking theme. If I said executing, I was looking at the word executing. I meant strategic thinking. I think people with high context, they think about ideas by looking for the roots of those ideas. So they would conceptualize a forest by thinking about what's below the surface. What are the physical roots of a situation? My dad has context in his top 5, and every single time he taught me a lesson, it came from something that had happened before. So very often you'll speak with people who have high context, and they'll describe this. They like history. They'll watch the History Channel. They'll enjoy hearing stories from the past. They'll be able to really get lost in those moments where they're looking at what has come before. And I think it's important to realize, and this may be where it's a little bit different for you, Jim, with your ideation. With context, it's not about creating. It's about linking to facts. And so in that way, it can look quite creative because it's about understanding where did things come from and then making those connections, much like ideation would. But it's not about making things up or sort of fictionalizing pieces. It's about understanding by having a very capable flexibility around connecting to what has been.
Yeah, and for me, it may be more like trivia and woo, trying to win people with the facts that I know, right? Hey, where's
Sure.
the first place that the first location? Like, I know where the first building in Omaha was built. I know the location. It's fun to drive by and say that because that's a more of an influencing, like, look how smart I am,
Yeah.
as opposed to the strategic thinking, which is how do we take this fact and make it relevant to what we're doing so we make the process better?
And I think you might also have just described the difference between strategic thinking themes versus influencing themes. So the motivation behind context is to feed your brain. Your motivation behind maybe your woo or your arranger, other themes. So now we're talking about the influencing or maybe executing themes. The motivation is to affect other people or to affect a process. Whereas context and those strategic thinking themes, it exists in that world of thoughtfulness, that internal piece. What context really wants is better understanding so that we can align our thought processes in a more orderly fashion going into the future. If you look now at let's take a look at that companion guide. The quick definition of context is at the very top, and it says, people exceptionally talented in the context theme enjoy thinking about the past. They understand the present by researching its history. As I was reading through our long definition in the CliftonStrengths Finder reference guide, there's quite a lot of references to the word blueprint. I'm not sure that that translates outside of English, but in English, when we talk about blueprints, we talk about the plans and the guides and the original ideas for a building. More conceptually, when we talk about blueprints, we think about, what is the foundation that we're building off of. People with high context really understand what's going on. They understand the building by looking at the plans for the building. So not only looking at what's happening now, but being able to place that and orient that against where we have been in the past.
Oh, very cool. Let's talk about raw versus mature. That's the next set of boxes in the companion
Sure.
guide.
Great. So raw content, and again, raw versus mature is about that developmental process. It's about where do you maybe notice some raw context and what does it look like when it's a strength is the mature side of things. So raw context could look like living in the past, whereas mature context looks like learning from the past. Raw context is, hold on, I need to do my research. Mature context is, I know the research and I can call upon it when needed. So I think about that example of how do you grow from just an innate talent with context to a real strength, something that's been used, being productively applied. With context, it's about gathering those informations, knowing, Jim, where's the oldest building in Omaha, being able to call upon the stories that you have already studied and the stories that you already know, and really, again, those facts, and use them in a way that they help to frame the picture for others.
Yeah. What else?
Raw context is, I've spoken with a frustrated people in my life. I do quite a bit of coaching. And this week, I was actually speaking with a very frustrated manager. And he was really tired of everything that we had done to try to help him. And he was convinced that this coaching was all about just another initiative, sort of a flavor of the week sort of piece. And he'd been in his role for several decades. And he's told me over and over and over again, nothing is ever new. You can't tell me anything that hasn't been done before. And it was a way to shut down. I think that's an example of perhaps raw context. It's an impatience with change, or an impatience with newness. The mature side of that is, rather than being impatient, being informative. So if raw is nothing is ever new, I think the mature side of that is, let me create a framework for nuance. So if you're impatient and shutting down, the other side of that is, let me help you understand what we've done before, because there's a beauty in context that can help us avoid pitfalls of the past, that can help us discard things that didn't work, but also understand how what we're doing maybe has been done before and what pieces of that worked. And even if it's not about does this work or doesn't work. Somebody with high context can help us understand how our efforts in the present and our plans for the future it connect to some, I think, a richer picture by giving it pieces of the past.
Micah, when you were talking about that piece, nothing new under the sun, right? That's when we think about that idea, a biblical idea. King Solomon, 2,500 years ago, said, "There's nothing new under the sun." We think about raw and mature. I'm going to kind of ask you a question about maybe as a basement of context. When that goes negative and we say there's nothing new can be done, you're not going to come up with any new ideas, that taking the path and making it a very, no matter what you do, nothing's going to change because it never has in the past. And then we think about the balcony of that, really where someone is pulling from the past to make the future a better place. Is that a fair comparison as we think about raw versus mature and then balconies and basements?
I think this one on raw versus mature is probably the closest to balconies and basements. I just think that I put it in as raw versus mature because I really do believe that if you're somebody with high context, your glasses are focused in on the past, and it takes some intentional growth to help other people see what you're seeing without and to realize that other people aren't noticing that. I think with your themes, no matter what they are, there's usually two reasons that you struggle to see them. If you've got clients who say this just isn't me, it's usually for one of two reasons. First, it's because you haven't seen value in it. You've never been valued for it. You've never been praised for it. You've never known anyone else who could be valuable. The second is you don't realize the whole world isn't that way. And perhaps the reason of the basement behavior that you describe would be there is if you're somebody with high context, you can very clearly see the past. You can understand a timeline. And I think the really beautiful thing about context that I'm incredibly envious of is people with high context understand history as progression. They understand the chapters and the strategy and the storyline of history, not just that, I have, the Lion King reference where you've got the monkey who hits him on the head and says, "What was that?" It doesn't matter. It's in the past. It's gone. My view of history, not having context, is, the past is one place. If you do have high context, the past is a lot of different places, and you understand how those places and the people and the happenings all sew together to really weave a beautiful tapestry. I think understanding not everyone else sees that is a really key piece in helping to see it as a valuable piece, to understand that your context could be something that other people need. And that is the journey from saying, gosh, nothing is new, to, wow, you don't realize we have tried this before, perhaps, and here's how we've tried it.
Dave in the chat room says, I think raw context also looks like this, always giving people far more background information that they really want. Interesting, right? Because you've got this context to the past, and you've got all this information about it, that key information about what is the right information that we need to move forward, instead of just a brain dump on everything. And I like to think, in that basement is that negativity of like, not only we can't do this, but we can't do this because of all these reasons in the past. Now, sometimes that's not always a bad thing, right? When you have a group trying to move a direction and the past has already proven that, like, hey guys, we've made this mistake in the past. So that can go both ways. I think context matters. You can't really use. I'm using context in a different way there, but you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. The motivation matters. I also think that let's not misunderstand context as looking for problems in the past. It can be that, but the people who I've known who have high context, they can give you problems, but it's bigger than that. What they're in love with is not the problems. What they're in love with is history. Right. And that means problems, that means successes, that means anecdotes, that means really, where did we come from?
Yeah. Let's there's some more info in there. So when we think raw mature, you got a couple more thoughts that I think really pertain to this.
More.
Yeah.
My most creative raw and mature here, I'm pretty proud of. Raw is just the rear view mirror. I had my very first car was a 1979 Ford LTD. It was called the Honky Blue Car because it's what my little brother named it when he was like 4. That's how long it was around. And it only had one rear view mirror. Not because the other one had been knocked off, it was actually the design. And I remember learning to drive in this incredibly dangerous car and thinking, wow, I'm just totally concerned about this one rearview mirror. And so I would look in that one all the time because there wasn't another option, but also because I thought, gosh, if there's only one, it must be really important. And it's not safe to only look in the rearview mirror. Mature context is encompassing the entire dashboard. My dad, who has high context and is a pilot, I remember him teaching me how to drive, and he would say, you know, Micah, what you need to do is train your eyes to constantly scan. You know, look in the rearview mirror, but also look at your dashboard, look at the speedometer, check the, you know, the temperature of your car, check the other rearview mirror, the visor mirror, look out the windscreen. And I think that's an example of how do you use context to bring it into helping people see a greater picture. Because whether it's historical or not, what context can offer to somebody is reference points, is touch points, is framework. And if you're only looking in the rearview mirror and you're not scanning the rest of the inputs that are coming out at you, then I think you're probably still in that raw place. But to really drive it and push it a little bit further is thinking about how am I also considering what we're doing right now, and maybe then that's how you help give the most pertinent background information. The final raw and mature, I have raw is what used to be with a question mark, and mature is how did we get here. So again, it's similar to the rearview mirror analogy. Raw is just enthralled with where we were and just focusing completely backwards, whereas mature is using that information to make decisions right now.
All right, let's talk about some complementary themes as we think about putting some together.
Yeah, when we talk about complementary themes, we think about who could you partner with, and of course, every single theme can be complementary. It really depends on what you're trying to get done. But I have a couple here. My first thought was adaptability. So somebody with context partnering with someone with high adaptability, I think it's about bringing credibility and bringing meaning into the moment today. Adaptability is about being in the present and being in the moment, and context, of course, could help us understand maybe how did we get to that moment, or how does this moment relate and help us be really calm if it's perhaps something that we've experienced before. Another complementary theme I've got is communication. So again, taking the fascination with the blueprint that context has, what somebody with high communication could bring to that is helping develop stories. Some of the coaching, I think, ideas that we have for people with context is help them to take what they know about the past and turn it into anecdotes, turn it into stories, turn it into ideas that they could share with others. Communication could do that very quickly. And I also added woo, actually, Jim, because I was thinking of you and your fascination with history. Woo is focused on how do I delight and engage other people. If you added context to that, it's how do I use history to delight and engage others. And to maybe contrast that, there's another piece of how do I use the facts that context brings, and that's analytical. So somebody with high analytical could help sort to the data, the facts, the proof in the past, and really think about how do we find the historical facts in order to engage with future data.
Micah, a little bit of disagreement in the chat room at the moment on our emphasis on the past. We've said that a bunch in this, and let me find the best statement because I think David probably sums it up nicely. And when he says, I think we're overemphasizing the role of history. Context is about putting everything into a framework of reference. Time's one dimension, but not the only. Contexters also think within geographic, cultural, economic, and other frameworks. So as you think of that feedback on there, more of certainly using time as a dimension, are there other things when we think about, certainly in the definition here, in our definition of it, it has past clearly defined. But what are your thoughts on that as we think about context and frameworks?
If you read the full theme description and you really look at the scientific definition of context, there is a obvious historical slant to it. Yeah. Now that historical slant, that's there. You're not going to get away from it, and it does need to be emphasized. In addition to that, I think that if you're intrigued by history and if you look toward the past, you're not just looking at the time aspect of history. You're looking at the cultural aspect. You're looking at you're looking at perhaps the legal aspect of history. You're looking at place. You're looking at the people involved in history. And I think perhaps our our disagreement here isn't with the definition of context, but maybe it's with a narrow definition of history as looking at only time. So I think that it absolutely is about a framework. That is the boots on the ground running. That's what context looks like, is framework. But you can't get away from the historical piece. It is certainly woven into the definition of context.
Yeah, and I think Luke makes an interesting statement. He says maybe not just the what happened. In other words, my version of context, like from earlier, was I know what happened, right? But that's not enough. It's knowing why it happened, right? It's that framework of usefulness in it. Like I have all these useless facts that when I go around, when we bring folks in and I give them tours, I have all these great facts. I don't necessarily tie those facts to a framework, again, because StrengthsFinder is about making people more productive, right? If this is not just saying things to have them be said, but saying things that allow things or processes or people to move forward in a more productive manner. So the why, I think, is super important. And so in that framework, we won't dwell on this too long, but it's a great discussion. And I think as you see that out there, and those of you who have context, I think it's something worth kind of working over. Any other thoughts on that before we move on?
I think that's big, Jim, is people with high context aren't just memorizing dates and facts and figures. People with low context, that might be their connection with history, is dates and facts and figures. But people with high context can think about the framework that happened. So I had a roommate with high context, and she could very clearly help me understand how what we were doing today philosophically tied into philosophy of the past, or the why, also the how. It's about, I think, 3D or maybe even 5D thinking around where we've been. And that includes how did we feel in the past, what led up to where we are today. It's also about how do I create some great understanding based on knowledge. Again, it comes back to it being a strategic thinking theme. It's this thirst for this craving to know more so that I can help create some framework, so I can help frame up the picture, so I can help bring credentials and reference points to what we're thinking about.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, at the end of the day, using me as the weird example in this, doesn't really matter if it's context or woo or a ranger. The point of the matter is that I know what I do, and can I use that in a way that makes me or the groups around me or the people around me better and more productive. And so regardless of what it is, I know I have this bent towards history, towards using that in a trivial sense. It really plays in nicely in my presentations because I can bring in these little facts that help connect people to some things that I'm trying to do and make the conversation interesting, right? So for me, at the end of the day, it's like, how do I make myself more productive knowing that? It's great we have the framework around it, but at the end of the day, it's like, how are we using this in the real world?
Well, and coaching in general needs to always be driven toward performance. So for you, as an individual, it is really important to lean into understanding what's your ranger, what's your woo, what does it hunger for, and how can it get even better. If you're somebody with context, it's important to understand what is that context, what does it hunger for, and how can it drive your performance.
Yeah, right on. Good discussion, guys. We always appreciate what you guys put into chat, so thanks for doing that. We have this section called likely and unlikely pairs. Let's work through those straight out of the database.
Yeah, so this comes from a random sample of 250,000 StrengthsFinder completes, looking at what's most common to show up in somebody's top 5 with context. That's your most likely, and that is input. So perhaps it goes without saying, but I think if you're thirsty for knowledge about framing things, then you're probably just thirsty in general for information. So it makes sense that those two go together. Input is about gathering information and collecting things. Now, it could be collecting ideas. If you have input plus context, it's probably about gathering stories, gathering understanding about the past. I try to sometimes boil this down to 2 words when we think about theme dynamics, and with context and input, I could do it in 1 word. I feel like I'm playing Name That Tune. I can do it in 1 word. Input plus context I see as just the word curator. The least likely pairs to show up with context could be just because they are among the least likely in our entire database, but that's a 3-way tie for command, focus, and significance. Now, when you do see them in somebody's top 5, the theme dynamics between context and command probably looks like a very quick ability to discard the mistakes and instruct people how we're going forward. So that it brings presence to the framework, I think. Focus and command would be a well-informed goal, So thinking about where did we come from, or what are the reference points of this, and how can we make sure that it is a specific target. And finally, significance. I love this combination, thinking about significance plus context, because significance wants to create a lasting legacy, and context is probably a studier of legacy. So together, I think about if you were somebody with significance and context, you could almost see yourself as a creator of future history.
Yeah. Interesting. We'll talk more about theme dynamics. The group has spoken, and we had some votes out on our Facebook page, facebook.com/groups/call-to-coach this week. We'll come back to that here in just a second. But we think about some final observations around context. And by the way, the chat room is really lit up on this. This is kind of fun to watch them interact with each other. But what are some other observations you'd have, Micah?
I think that context is all about engaging with the background. And from a theatrical perspective, a background can be about, like we talked about, the place, the people, the credentials, the data, the culture, the history. And I was listening to an interview on NPR last week with Ray Romano. And for those of you who know Ray Romano, he's probably most famous for Everybody Loves Raymond, a sitcom. But he was talking about his work done in more long-form, more serious roles. And the interviewer asked him how he got his head into that. And he said, you know what, I can't even operate until I've written a backstory for each of my characters. And he talked about even doing that in his pretty light-hearted sitcom days. And I just thought, wow, what a great example of perhaps context of I can't even move forward until I've understood where we've been and understood where my character has been.
And that plays into that framework concept, right?
Doesn't it? Yeah.
A full character was made and designed by the experiences that was brought to that point. And so you see that it's almost like seeing that if we think about a cylinder, right? I think like a PVC pipe. Mm-hmm. And it's a big long pipe that's got distance, and it's some of that dimension. When you turn that to look straight on, all you see is the circle, right? All you see is that circle spot as you're looking at this way. You can't see the pipe anymore because it disappears. But the results of that history are there, and I think as I think about this visually, it's one of those kinds of pieces. It's not the pipe that we're seeing, just the end of the pipe, but the end couldn't get there unless the rest of it had met that way. And so it's
I like that.
Yeah, interesting way. It's a good way for me to kind of think through that when I think of context.
Yeah, I think so too. It's about the relationship with where we've been. People with high context they don't just see it, they don't just think about it, they really can experience the full picture. And so it's more than just what used to happen. And again, it's not just dates and facts and figures, it's that entire relationship with everything that has been before us, and that is what informs the future. And it's not just that I'm stuck wondering about where we've gone, it's that ability to say where we are today came from somewhere. And the depth and the texture that they can bring to conversations, I think, is really important. Let's contrast that even to competition. So in a leadership standpoint, we talk about competition bringing external benchmarks and the ability to look left and right at how are other people doing, to compare that to our own performance. I think context can do that in a different way, where you're not necessarily comparing yourself to other performers, but context, you are comparing the situation, comparing the ideas to ideas that have existed before, or perhaps even reasons that those ideas have existed before. And it's that ability to really bring a more informed perspective to frame it up for people. Yeah. When you think about coaching somebody with context, I like to help them think, how do you display what you're understanding, because again, not everybody sees the world that way. And how do you help others understand the value of your themes? One way you can do that is think about polishing and curating, let's say, your book of anecdotes, your book of stories. It seems like when you coach people with high context, that you'll get them talking about the past, and you can kind of sort of start to feel out for a hot button. And by hot buttons, we mean positive things that you could talk about for days. You can pick out certain parts of history sometimes that they are incredibly interested in or incredibly knowledgeable about, or maybe certain anchor points or certain ideas that help them understand where they've been. In season 1, we spoke with a colleague here at Gallup who talked about maps being one of his hot buttons. And so it was all about different places and different cultures and sort of the geographical touch points. when I've spoken with other people, it's, I know everything there is to know about World War II, or I'm specifically interested in, this portion of the women's suffrage movement. And it is, how do you help them really polish in where they could be an expert and develop some stories around that? Maybe it's even understanding the history of your company and your organization or your industry. Help them develop some quick, pithy stories that they can then offer to others, pieces that if they're constantly going there in their mind, how do you help get that out of their brain and into a broader perspective so that it could be valued by others? I also think it's important with context to literally do your homework. So if you're feeling disoriented and you have high context, a piece that can help orient you is to spend some time reading biographies, reading backgrounds, reading additional information that might help set the scene for you. And that can, knowing that that's something that might help you, doing it on purpose before you're asked to make a big decision can be a really great idea.
I love your concept of blueprints too. When we think about, let's think about a building in the sense of what we're putting together. That's a series of decisions. The blueprints just aren't what we want the space to look like and how to be laid out, but it's often a group of decisions that have been made over time, over experience. In other words, we build with these girders and steel frame in this location. We know if we don't, the roof will collapse. We're going to put these electrical outlets in these locations because we know not only does the code say so, but we've learned over time that we do this for these reasons. And so the blueprints just aren't a willy-nilly, this is what we feel like, but they're based on this context of, in this case, the building code. Then it becomes the context for us. And so I oftentimes think, and it could be, Abby had mentioned, that can be, from a historical content, that could be days or minutes away. In other words, yesterday this happened, guys, and this leads us to this conclusion when we think about it. So we don't always have to think about ancient history or even, that dimension can be minutes or hours ago.
Sure, yeah.
Anything else before we kind of dive into theme dynamics?
I think there's value in the phrase, those who, hold on, I'm actually going to read it because otherwise I'm going to make it up, ideation, and I'm going to get it wrong. But
we do that.
You and I look at this phrase, when I want to understand what's happening today, I try to decide what will happen try to decide what will happen tomorrow, I look back. If I want to decide what's happening today or make sense of what's happening tomorrow, I look back. I love that. And I actually took another quote directly from season 1 when I was watching and listening to people. And he said, I'm all about where we've been and where we're going.
Yeah, by the way, season 1 context is a very special video for us. And not only does Jerry do a great job, last video with Kurt. And so if you haven't gone back and reviewed that, you might want to. It's a really, really good episode that we pulled together. Jerry has context very, very high and actually has some great stories in there, which I think you'll want to listen to. So again, go back, just Google that or head to our YouTube channel and put in context. And we have both a short version and a long version available for you. And Micah, that was a little tough for me to watch that one this week. I'm not going to lie to you. That was
me too.
That was tough. We let's celebrate it, by the way, because we have a work from Kurt that we have available in his book, Theme Dynamics, and Expanding Your Strengths is the name of the book. Available in Canada right now, U.S., Canada, and the U.K. Micah, why don't you talk a little bit about Theme Dynamics as I set this piece up?
Sure. So again, such a gift from our friend Kurt. He took on this idea of, could I take a look at every potential pair that there is within all 34, and just quickly describe what that pair and those dynamics might look like. I was coaching somebody this morning on what does the term theme dynamics mean, and the way I could best describe it was thinking about mixing colors. If there were 34 colors on their own, that's what our 34 themes would be, and then we take a look at 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 at a time, and we mix those colors together and see how that changes. So what we're going to do is we voted, and if you're not on our Called to Coach Facebook page, make sure to go out to Facebook and join there. It's a really credible place, and hats off to Jim for doing quite a bit of work sowing the right seeds and weeding out the pieces that honestly shouldn't be there. It is a place that you can trust in terms of
we don't have to do too much weeding. It's a pretty good
we really don't, but you did at the very beginning. I know you did. And it is now a fantastic place to go. And on there, we've we voted for the themes that you want to see compared, contrasted, added to context for this week. So what we're looking at here is, what if you had these two together? How might they look? And the first one that's up is context and strategic. I love this. They're both strategic thinking themes. Again, strategic's about creating a plan very quickly, constantly thinking about what if and if then, and using that to come up with the best path forward. When you add that to context, it sounds like this. While some only consider possibilities they can imagine, you embrace possibilities you remember from the past. When I thought about these together, it's both context and strategic are about patterns. Strategic is about picking up patterns that lead to a plan, and context is about looking for patterns from the past that will help you understand the future. Or even, I like David's example here of picking up a map of the city in any new hotel room you come into. So looking for those patterns, looking for the breadcrumbs. And when you blend these together, I think they both are about telling a story. It's about telling a more informed story. So a storyline that has spotlights on history, perhaps, or spotlights on specific reference points.
Yeah, I think of Jason Bourne, and I've been watching the Bourne movies again. And every time he gets to a new city, he grabs a map and he opens that up and studies it for a few minutes to kind of know where to go. Now, that's a hyper version of strategic and context when we put those together. But knowing where to go, because he's got reference points and he's studied that framework, so to speak, to be able to act upon those things that have already been put in place. So
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Let's do context and arranger.
Arranger is an executing theme. So again, it's about what arranger wants is the most efficient path forward to get something done. And when you add that to context, it sounds like this. Your appreciation and understanding of the past helps you orchestrate the multiple surprising realities of the present. I like to think about arranger as the ability to keep a dozen ping pong balls underwater at the same time. You just know where to go to shift things. And context, I think, brings some credibility to that. So I actually, you're watching the Bourne series, it's probably healthier than what we've been binging on lately, which is House of Cards. And in House of Cards, the main character, Frank Underwood, likes to recreate battle scenes physically. Like, he will take old battle scenes and use little figurines to recreate those battles. And he's got entire tables, like, think about the size of a pool table, recreating these historical battles. I think if you had arranger and context, you might be recreating those battle scenes probably in a way that gets your side of the team, or your country or your side, the best advantage to think about how can we move forward. What does the entire picture look like? How do I put it in place so that it works the very best?
Now let's look at context and connectedness.
Super cool. And I saw several of you were thinking about this one. JB actually had a really good answer to what's the, compare and contrast these two. Connectedness is a relationship building theme. It's about embracing the holistic nature of life. And connectedness is about understanding the links between all things. And that's not just the links between what has happened, again, those patterns for context. It's also about maybe a more mystical, maybe a more spiritual connection between what's happening now and how that's linked to a bigger picture. When you blend that together in one person with context, it might sound like this. You view the world through a lens that gives you both a holistic global perspective and a historical retrospective. Love the word retrospective, especially thinking about context. When I put these together, I came up with the phrase spiritual historian.
I like that. I like it. Let's look at context and restorative.
Great. So restorative is an executing theme. It's all about problem solving. And when you put it together with context, it's your memory of and appreciation for past problem solving enhances your ability to solve present and future problems. So what I think restorative gives context is, it's an executing thing, but I was just going to say it gives it an execution arm. It gives it a way to get context out of your brain and into like a forward motion. It's almost an engine or an outlet for that context. When I boiled it down to 2 words, I used a hyphen, so 2.5 words. I came up with a problem-oriented historian. Perhaps you're looking for how have we solved this in the past, or how do we avoid getting ourselves into past problems, because you're aware of problems with restorative.
And then not next week, but 2 weeks from now, we're taking a Thursday off in a break here in our GWSW or Gallup Weekly Strengths Wisdom series. we're going to talk about deliberative, and this is my anti-theme in a lot of ways for me, because I don't like to slow down. But when we put context and deliberative together, let's talk a little bit about that.
Your anti-theme. I love that. Yeah, so I'm super excited. 2 weeks from today, we'll be talking about deliberative. And deliberative, I like to describe as being you're coming up with the plan by using Google Street View. So you think through every single part of the plan, looking for, potential pitfall. People with high deliberative are about they're very risk averse. They're very cautious, and it's about really understanding the entire plan and embracing the entire plan step by step before you decide to take the first piece. It is an executing theme, and when you add that to context, I think it just it deepens the planning aspect of context. So if you think about if you're going to be somebody who takes great care in developing the plan, deliberative, the way that you take care with context is you're going to consider not just what could happen, but what has happened. It sounds like this. You can prevent problems because you anticipate what could go wrong, and you recall past failure. What a fantastic QA sort of combination there when you look at those two together.
I'm going to drop the link to our Hangout here. This is the part of the program where and let me shift over just a little bit here so we can get this off screen and get us back on track with that, Micah. Okay, and this is a part where if you have context in your top 5, we'd love you to call in. It's a little tricky sometimes to call in. You need to have a webcam, and there's usually a built-in microphone in that webcam. And if you have never used Google Hangouts before, it may take a little bit. You have to install a plugin just to get it set up. Doesn't take long. It should take about a minute or so to get logged in. But one of those, Micah, while we're waiting for folks, I dropped that link in the chat room. If you're listening to the recorded version, of course, it's not available anymore. But if I said the anti-theme, to me, and when we talk about theme bias, right? Let's talk about that a little bit. In the sense, well, let's not talk about that a little bit because we've got.
Well, that thought's a really good thought. We'll come back to it. Hello.
Hey, tell us who you are. Tell us your name. Right. Let's talk about that a little bit. You have 2 windows open. Make sure you close the live one so you don't. This is like live radio. Can you turn off your radio, please? Can you hear us? Yeah, that's better. Tell us who you are.
My name is Tess, and I'm right now in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm an intern with Teammates Mentoring Program here.
Sweet, a local girl. Welcome to Theme Thursday. Where does context land for you?
I lead with context. It's my #1 strength.
Nice. And so tell us how's that play out for you? When you define it in your own role, in your own self, what does it look like?
Sure. It actually really plays into the rest of my top 5. So I lead with context, adaptability, strategic learner, and individualization. And so at least like right now, it really is playing out along with my individualization. So I really love and appreciate people's individual histories and individual stories. And so when it plays with individualization, I often see my context as an appreciation for an individual person's history and the stories that things that have gone on in their life, and then my strategic and adaptability really plays out to see what kind of problems they're facing currently, and then my strategic looks towards the future and says how can we understand your individual past history to look at what you're dealing with in the present to help you kind of look towards the future and make decisions for the future.
That's awesome. When you said context and individualization, here's the definition from Kurt's book. Your understanding of others takes into consideration their unique history, who they naturally are, and where they come from. And I think you just said that, right? I mean, do you agree with that statement? Yeah. No, pretty cool. Just as you said that, I thought, I wonder how that lines up. And then, so what's your role? What do you do?
I am actually a student right now. I'm a senior at Creighton University and studying cultural anthropology and sociology. So a lot of the culture and appreciation for like tribal histories is also really important to me as well. So
that's great. Tess, can you tell us a little bit about what context looked like for you when you were younger? Can you think of times when you noticed context, or now that you know you have it, what it looked like for you as a kid?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I have an internal compass, and I think that could be a lot of like my context. I mean, you can place me in a forest in a foreign country, and I could probably figure out the patterns and figure out the way that the area is set up in order to kind of get myself and navigate myself out of any sort of situation. And so I think I always was kind of the pack leader when it came to like fun things in the neighborhood, because I just knew where to go and what to do and where to get to the playground and where to get to school. And I still have that. Like, you can drop me in a city and I don't even need to look at a map or study, and I think that maybe might be my adaptability. Like, I just can kind of figure it out, and my strategic allows me to figure out patterns of how streets line up and how a city might be set up.
That orienting, I think, is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of that Jason Bourne reference that I used earlier, right? You can drop me in a city, and I don't even, like, I can look at the map and kind of understand. I think because context is so strong for you too, one of the things that let's use the city example, is that most cities are set up very similar.
Yeah.
And so you don't necessarily have to, because you know another city.
Yeah.
That context allows you to pull that in, and I like how you say adaptability in there as well, because you don't get worried that, you can drop in and you're like, yeah, okay, if I get lost, not a big deal, but I kind of know. I think I do a lot of traveling, and I try to travel transportation whenever I can. So I take the Metro in D.C. or the L when I'm in Chicago, or the BART when I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. All those systems work very similar, and so for me it's pretty easy. Well, okay, if I know this, then it's kind of that. Are there other situations and stuff that you've done where you can say, because I know this, it also applies to that?
I think I pull that with a lot of things. Like, you were just talking about traveling, Jim, and I think I actually spent a half a year abroad last year as part of schooling. I spent a semester abroad and got to travel a lot, and I think understanding how cities and areas are geographically mapped out and how they're so similar just kind of allowed me, and the adaptability allowed me an ease to kind of be like, okay, we can just take the train to Paris, and I'll figure it out when we get there, and we can just walk around and decide. And I think specifically for me, once I go one place, I never again need to remember or look up how to go. No matter where it's at, I can kind of remember like landmarks I pass, and kind of mentally map out where the place is. So I never need to, once I go someplace one time, even if I'm not driving, I can just remember exactly where I need to go.
Whoa, that's awesome. I think that there's this amazing remember piece of it. Tess, the chat room's lighting up in love with you, and they would like to know, with that cool combination of context and adaptability, how do you handle change?
That's a good question, I think. My strategic really allows me to see all kind of avenues, and adaptability. I get excited about change, and I love it, and I think my context really comes into play understanding either my own past experiences or the past experiences of like an organization, how they can be used to change for the better in the future. I love to look in the rearview mirror, and that's kind of how I live life, and I really appreciate the past, but it doesn't get me stuck in the past. It gets me more excited for the future and what new past we can create.
So the theme dynamic says you immerse yourself in each moment, and your memory of each experience allows you to relive it as if it were today.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Does that kind of match?
Yeah, I think that definitely matches. Yeah, I guess definitely like memories in my past that I really enjoy. Like, I love to kind of almost set myself up in a similar situation. Like, I love when I have like one friend that I really enjoy like grabbing coffee with, always being sure I set up like subsequent coffee dates or times to meet with those people in order to kind of go back to where we were in conversation and just get even deeper. I'm a very love to talk at a really deep level, and so I think that creates kind of a almost consistency in the fact that I want to continue building deeper relationships with people in order to uncover more of their past.
Tell us a little bit about teammates, what the purpose is, and then I want you to tell me how you're going to use context to make it better.
Okay. So Teammates is a one-on-one school-based mentoring program, and it's our central office location is based here in Omaha, but we originally started in Lincoln, and so a little bit of history there, I guess. My first inclination is to tell you guys about the history of the organization, but now currently we have over 7,000 mentoring matches across the state of Nebraska and also in Iowa, and so actually I've accepted a full-time position with Teammates after graduation graduation in May, and I will be actually working with their data and systems management. And so I think that plays into, I guess, like my strategic a lot. I think the very first theme dynamic you guys looked at was like strategic and context. And I think in terms of like my context and strategic, I've been looking a lot at how to revamp kind of our data systems and data management. And so that considers how we've done it in the past and how we've collected data and understanding how we're doing it now in order to make it more efficient for the future.
Well, a nonprofit, that's key. Hold on, I'm echoing. It'll go away in just a second. Let's give it a second here. Maybe not. In nonprofit, that's particularly important not to repeat the errors of the past, right? Because that can get very expensive, and a lot of nonprofits don't have a lot of money to throw around. So, as you think of that context strategic, is that kind of a concern when you think about the money?
Yeah, I think definitely so. I mean, we're always trying to make the most out of everything we have and just make the system and make the program as efficient as we can. And I think that comes with, and that development of making the program more efficient comes with an understanding of what has happened and what hasn't happened well in the past. What things have allowed us to grow and develop more, and what things have kind of hindered us from development. So I think my context really comes into play when I understand what we've done in the past, and from what we've done, what's worked well and what hasn't, and then taking what's worked well and saying, how can we either revisit this or develop it even further?
That's awesome. Mike, anything else?
Tess, anything that you wish everybody understood about context?
Good question.
I think at least for me, because it's such a strategic thinking theme, I think I need time to process information a lot. So if you're I would suggest if you're coaching someone with context, giving them time to process what's going on and time to recall information, because I'm able to remember a lot of things, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get through my brain, like all my file cabinets of information in my brain. It takes time to sift through them in order to figure out what would be the most relevant.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tess. You rocked this.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in. And you've shown how easy this is to do, so thanks for jumping in.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Take care. That's as easy as it gets. You just, Tess was ready to go. That's the best we've had so far, Mike. Yeah. I'm not going to lie.
Fantastic work.
Just knocked it out of the park. That's kind of what we're looking for. By the way, Teammates, you can find more information about Teammates. That was a question in the chat room, teammates.org. That is a local organization here out of Nebraska, formed by Coach Tom Osborne, who's the head football coach for the University of Nebraska for a lot of years, and then the athletic director as well. And it's a mentoring program, super important, right? Micah, we know from our Gallup-Purdue Index, there's two really big factors when we think about the college experience and people being successful when they leave, when they exit, when they go into the workforce. Those two things are internships and mentors. And of course, Teammates is not a college mentoring program, but it is a mentoring program for students, and they do a lot of great work. So
and their strengths is at the core, so they do quite a bit of really great work at understanding strengths.
Yeah. No, we didn't plant that call, by the way.
I do work with Tess through Teammates, but no, I didn't know she was going to call in. So that's well
awesome.
Done.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's how you do it. You just turn on your webcam and you jump in. We probably have time for one more if somebody wanted to jump in. What was I saying? Do you remember what I was going to tell you?
I do, and then I want you to throw it back to me for the very end because I have the best context quote ever. Okay. But I'm going to save that. You were talking about the anti-theme.
Oh yeah, we're talking about theme biases from that standpoint, and deliberative is one of those things for me. I always think and like to move fast, and so deliberative gets in my way. We know that's not the truth from that standpoint. We want to love all 34 themes and what they do, and actually, by doing these webcasts, deliberative was one I really struggled with because I like to move so fast when I was younger, or even just yesterday. So it's one of those things
yesterday when you were younger.
That's right, understanding context. So, but for me, it's really about, in this series here, Theme Thursday, has really taught me about, and so for me, for deliberative, I really need to lean on those people who will think through systematically a problem that I might have, and really value their thoughts. I come up with a lot of ideas. They're not all good. I do need those restorative and deliberative people to come in and really pick through. Now I have Maximizer, so that helps me. I can kind of sort those ideas, but sometimes I still need to think about them beyond this, beyond 5 minutes. This is where you've been good for me, whether you have that or not, which I don't think. But you and I, when we come up with some of these ideas, I think about them, and then you kind of think them through and throw them back at me. And we really kind of come to the best possible solution by doing that. So one of those, I just wanted to clarify that statement, that we want to love all 34 themes, and Kurt would have said that. He said that several times.
I think the way to fall in love with them is to be honest about your blind spots around them. I would, when I teach classes, I ask people to fill in the blank, and I'll give them some blind spot sentences, like, to be honest, my first reaction to blank theme was less than positive, or if I'm really honest with myself, I need to see a positive example of X theme, or I'm just still not sure how blank is a strength. Be honest with yourself, go through that, and then go through the work it takes to fall in love with them, because every single one of these themes has led someone to greatness, and that's not a bad thing. That's something we need to embrace and love. I won't shy away from that word. We really do need to love them if we're going to help people grow from potential into performance.
Micah, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. So glad you asked. Ladies and gentlemen, your moment of Zen. The quote comes from Daisaku Ikeda, Daisaku Ikeda, or picturequotes.com, and it is this: to communicate the truths of history is an act of hope for the future.
That's a good quote. End this on another great session with you, Micah. Thanks for doing this each week with me. I enjoy doing it. We love your feedback, by the way. If you want to send us, if there's anything in particular you want to get in contact with us and send us some feedback, coaching@gallup.com is the best way to send that in, and they'll route that back around to us. The folks, it's just not Micah and I that do these Theme Thursdays. We have a whole team that helps support what we do around this, and they love to hear those things too. We have someone who writes the blog for us. I think of Kate, who does that. We have Roy, who does the video editing to make it all work great on the backside and make it look good. There's lots of folks you never even see that make the network infrastructure work so that we can actually make these videos happen. And so we appreciate all of them that help do that. But if you want to send us your comments, and some of you have, and it's actually really nice. It's a good drop in our buckets, right,
Yeah,
Micah?
and if they're positive comments, we'll even read them.
We will, yeah. The negative ones, not so much. I used to say, we don't, no, but we always take, we'll always take those. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com. Like I said, send us your questions or comments. We love to get those. If you're thinking about guest blogging for us, maybe you're a prolific writer and you'd like to get some information in, we kind of try you out. You get a little tryout. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and put guest blogger in the subject line so we can get that routed over to Micah.
Yeah, and feel free, if it's even a blog that you've already put on your own blog and you just want a little bit more airtime, if it's about strengths or if it's about Clifton Strengths Finder or it's about coaching, feel free to send that to us, and if it's great, we'll make sure and highlight you.
Yeah, our coaches blog gets about 250,000 views every single year. We'd love that to be 500,000. That's our next goal, to get that in here, and yet I think we can reach that goal this year if we really drive folks to the blog. So again, that's all out at coaching.gallup.com. A bunch of other resources too, including our Facebook links to our Facebook group, YouTube page, the iTunes and RSS feeds, iPhone and Android apps are out there as well, including the complete schedule, and now linkable companion guides are all out in the GWSW schedule. Coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, we got a list of all our courses on a brand new site available for you, courses.gallup.com. Easy way. If you have questions around it, we have a certification address too, certification@gallup.com. Lots of information for you. I'll mention again, we've got the Strength Summit coming up July 18th through the 20th, and we'd love to have you here in Omaha. Information is available on that courses.gallup.com site. If you're interested in discovering all 34 of your talent themes, an upgrade to your top 5 is available at the Gallup Strengths Center. You can get information and pricing available out at gallupstrengthscenter.com. One last thing, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at StrengthsFinder. Super easy, about 23,000 on that Twitter account. We'd love to have you follow us there as well. If you found this helpful, please share it, and we'll look forward to joining you in 2 weeks, although if this is time shifted, there may be next week's already there. So with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.